Welcome to the Harvesting Wisdom podcast. Together we explore the vast landscapes of life, delving into the rich soil of experiences, sowing the seeds of curiosity, and harvesting the profound wisdom that each episode unfolds.
Hi, I'm Dr. Roselle, Chief Operating Officer for Urban Farming Education. I'm here today as a guest host for Harvesting Wisdom. Super excited to have Tregg with me, and Tregg and I just recently met. We're going to be working together to put on the longest table, and we both have our respective roles. Me as somebody that's working with a nonprofit, and you're on the media side. So really, what we're going to be discussing today really centers around the importance of information and media. And why it's important not only to nonprofits but just basic decision making. So let's start with your credentials, your organization, and then let's dive into the question: how important is media and that local story to decision making in any community?
Well, first of all, thank you very much for having me. I really appreciate joining this podcast today, and I'll be interested and excited to watch it later on as well. So, again, my name is Tregg White. I'm the president and CEO of the Arizona Media Association and the Arizona Local News Foundation. The Arizona Media Association is the trade association for Arizona media. So we have nearly 400 members of television, radio, newspaper, and digital only publications. And so we really provide a membership service to those media brands, such as advocacy at the state level, at the national level. We provide some other membership opportunities. In fact, this year we've been able to help fund 87 internships into media brands. And so that those dollars get to go and pay for and help an intern throughout the summer to be able to have a future in this industry in media, whether it's in television, radio, or in newspaper. And through that megaphone of nearly 400 members, we created the Arizona Local News Foundation. The Arizona Local News Foundation has a mission of strengthening communities through the lens of journalism. We believe that journalism itself is really a civic duty for us. It's a service that we provide. It's almost like a critical service in a community because it's information, sometimes it's entertainment, but it's allowing to create the opportunity to create conversations among people. And when you create conversations among people, usually that leads to creating solutions for a community.
Yeah, and honestly, one of the things that I find interesting is and I've talked to my own kids about this. They said, "Well, I don't necessarily need to watch news anymore because I can watch YouTube, and there's plenty of people out there that are creating content." And my messaging to them was, "Well, what about their motivation? Why are they creating that content?" I'm not saying it's always bad or good, but sometimes that motivation doesn't come clear. So that's one of the questions I wanted to ask you: is what is the motivation of your organization? I know that we've had conversations, and I think I know what it is, but let's talk about that.
Yeah, motivation is strengthen journalism in the communities we serve, future proof this industry, because without it, we lose a lot of accountability. Currently, we're doing a lot of debates, political debates, and a lot of our media brands are either streaming them or televising them. And without that avenue to be able to provide that public service, what would we know about a candidate? Look, I think even with the longest table and other events that we're involved in, there are so many solutions out there. You have a lot of solutions, but how do we get that out, and how do we turn up that volume so everyone can hear that? When you have an opportunity through 400 media brands to reach millions of Arizonans every single day with a message, again, that creates the connections, it creates conversations, and it creates impact.
Well, and I want you to touch a little bit on the motivation of the small town reporting, because I think you said you were in 16 different communities. And the point I really wanted to make is there's a couple of news channels here in Phoenix, but there's not a news channel in Congress. There's not one in Weldon. There's not one, I don't think, in Safford. So why is it so important? What's the motivation of actually going out into these rural parts of the state and telling their story?
Well, there's a lot of values and beliefs that are different in rural Arizona versus in the metropolitan areas. And so when you can have journalists in these underserved areas, you're hearing a voice that needs to be heard. Their challenges, their values, their beliefs, their stories are a lot different than whether it's in Tucson or Flagstaff or the Valley. And so it's important to have that. The 16 journalists that you talk about, through our Arizona Local News Foundation and what we call our Arizona Community Collaboration, it was about identifying a hot topic that was painful in Arizona. And it just happened to be education that it surfaced to the top. It's, hey, we know we have challenges in the state when it comes to education. And so the foundation was able to help find and secure funding to be able to help fund 16 journalists at local media brands across the state. So there is a education solutions journalist in Nogales. There's one out in Yuma. There's the Kingman area, Flagstaff, Phoenix, of course, Tucson. They're scattered all over. And so when you have these journalists that are focused on a topic, such as education, which you're very familiar with, it allows the 16 different viewpoints that are different to come as one. So whatever challenges may be in Nogales may be different than in Tucson, but what can Tucson learn from Nogales or vice versa? And I think through our education solutions journalists and our collaboration, we've been able to address education. These journalists have put together nearly 2,000 stories over the last year. They have another year in this collaboration to be able to do stories. We're focusing now this summer. So early August, they'll do a kind of a collaboration within the collaboration. These 16 journalists are going to focus on two topics: teacher retention and then empowerment scholarship accounts. And when you have 16 different, again, opinions, solutions to these two major topics, what can we do with that? And I believe we can create some change. We can make an impact, or at least get to the highest levels of the state and say, listen to this. What can we do? What can we do to change the course and go from maybe 48th in the country in education to 47th, and then keep moving down that or up those ranks to make sure that our students are better educated, to be able to be better servants of the state, better employees within the state. I mean, ultimately leads to workforce development. And if we can start there at the education level and then get them to be good contributing citizens in Arizona and building their families and building careers here, I think that's a win.
Yeah, you brought up a lot of good points. And as a former educator, I had the opportunity through consulting or doing solutions team visits to visit different parts of the state. And one of the things that I was hit with over and over again is not any system or any location is all good or all bad. So I think you're exactly right. There's challenges in some of the rural communities, but they also have great strengths that the urban schools can use in order to incorporate. The other thing is just when you're creating a policy. We've both seen it, I'm sure, many times before when you create a policy and because there's a gap of information or a stakeholder doesn't come to the table, then the solution isn't complete and you have to go back to the drawing board and rethink it. So talk to me a little bit about any kind of aha moments that your reporters have had around education. You said it was the entitlement scholarships and teacher shortage. What are some of the aha moments strictly because they came from just a different part of the state?
Well, this isn't really an aha type storyline, but it's about collaboration and resources and tapping into each other to be able to deliver a better story with a varied viewpoint in it. So in Tucson, we have two education solutions journalists. One's on the television side, one is on the digital platform side. They've started to team up now and share bylines. So again, it's maybe not like a storyline of like, wow, this is going to make an impact, but it's a secondary one where it is about resources, because in this industry, like many, it's economically challenged. On the commercial side, they're relying on advertising dollars, they're relying on other forms of revenue. And, the economy is not as strong as it could be in that arena right now. So it's what are the opportunities? And again, when I believe that the future, kind of that future proofing this industry a little bit, is this opportunity of collaboration with other journalists. Even though you're competing journalists, there are ways to collaborate. You can share the content, you can share information. And again, I think what we'll see in August are at least a few stories where it's a shared byline between different media brands. And for me, that is that aha moment for our industry. It won't be something that maybe the viewer or the reader will see and recognize, but in an industry view, it'll be something that I recognize.
Yeah, and I honestly, whether it's climate, sustainability, or education, I see the value in it because when you're having more of a well-rounded story or more well-rounded perspective, it's always going to lead to more impactful change. So when you think of education as a whole, your motivation of providing that well-rounded story, are there any other motivations or any other lessons you've learned from doing the project on the education side?
We learned that it's impactful. Again, just we do a lot of scrubbing of the internet after stories are released, and we watch if the stories have been shared. All of the content that these 16 journalists have created, again, nearly 2,000 stories, it's all white labeled. Anybody can pick it up. A different media brand can pick the story up, just attribute it correctly. Nationally, somebody can pick it up and attribute it correctly. Again, these stories are available for anyone to access, to have, to read, to republish. Again, I think that's one of the important parts out of all of this that we've learned is that we have to be able to, again, just turn up that volume really loud on education and on the communities. Like, we don't want to go in as media, we don't have to always go into a community when something negative is happening. And I think that there is that narrative that's been there of we only go where bad things are happening or the biggest thing is happening. Maybe it's the egg drop from the helicopter in a small community, and we might show up because it's fun and exciting. Well, we're there to also report on all the positive things that are happening in the community, all the action and the improvements that community has made, not just the negative stuff. And if we can highlight that and we can build on it, really it comes down to just building additional trust. I think that when you live and work in a community, you have a different kind of trust factor in there. And I mentioned it before about values and beliefs. I can tell you from experience that having a reporter in a smaller community that's living and working there can make all the difference in the world. I was once told by a sheriff, he said, and I met him for the first time, and he said, "Tregg, I trust you." I was like, "Whoa, sheriff, yeah, that's pretty bold. We just met." He goes, "No, it's not." I said, "Why?" He goes, "I trust her, so I automatically trust you. Just don't break it."
Oh, that's fantastic.
And I thought it was one of those moments where, again, when you think about like the national news that we hear and the local news, this is where local news, the local journalist, whether it's again in Sholo or in Sedona, the role they play is about building trust in their community. And when you build the trust in your community, the engagement changes. It's more open because I see you at the basketball game. I see you at the park. I see you in the grocery store. And that relationship starts to build of not just oh, here comes Tregg again with his camera. He's going to tell a negative story about X. Instead, it's, okay, I know because I trust him to be able to tell the right story that is fair, that is equal, that is balanced, and has all the viewpoints in it. And it really allows me to make that informed decision as a consumer of this is what I can do with it. Again, we want to create solutions at the end of the day and take that, even if it's a negative, let's figure out how to create a solution out of that. And then it creates the impact in the community.
Well, it's funny you bring that up because we just had our film festival and one of the directors said exactly what you're saying. He said there's a trend in the documentary field for directors to come in, like helicopter directors. They come in, they get the story, but they miss a lot unless they build relationships. He said by coming in and getting to know the community first, building that trust, the story changes. And he said a lot of it is on our side because we see that community differently, and we're getting a much deeper story. One thing that I really wanted to bring up today that I don't want our viewers to miss is these stories are open source. And when you first described it to me, it's not something that you're putting in a paper. These are things where you're developing relationships with local news stations. So these great, well-rounded stories are being folded in. Talk to me a little bit about that and the impact that you've seen on local and statewide and national news based on your efforts.
Well, there's been a lot of just different conversations about what Arizona has been doing with our collaborative, with our journalists. You know, a lot of the larger press organizations that are out there, the nonprofit press organizations, have talked a lot about what Arizona is doing with this collaboration. And again, it's about just getting that message out of through whether it's TV or newspaper or digital only. It's about just getting that message out. And then again, I have not seen like a huge impact, like, you know, that maybe that feather in the cap moment as of today. I have not seen that, but there's been little wins just overall. It's the little wins of someone saying, you know, our school has been given the most exposure it's ever had. Or it's about teachers and pay and the retention side about thank you for supporting and telling our story that we need to have out there so people can understand the challenges of education and being a teacher.
And I think that's an absolute huge win. A lot of these stories that you tell would go untold onto great parts of our state. And when it goes back to the decision making, we may or may not make the right decision because we don't have all the stakeholders at the table. One of the challenges that nonprofits face is that we're very siloed. And honestly, before I met you, I didn't realize that our approach to raising awareness is siloed either. I wouldn't have thought to partner with a great organization like yours, but when it comes to education or stewardship or climate change, talk to me about the role of how the media can come in and work with these sectors that don't have the ability or don't have the background of getting the story out, and why that's so important to think of that partnership.
Well, you kind of nailed it, right? So some silos that, again, there's so many solutions out there. There's so many solutions, practical solutions, easy ones for me to do at home or my neighbor to do at home. And what the challenge has been is that how do we get that message out there? And so what our next collaboration will be is sustaining Arizona. Again, we learned a lot and we continue to learn from our education solutions collaborative, but looking at being better stewards. What I'll tell you, again, one of your very first questions was like, tell me a little bit about yourself, credentials. So I'm just a farm boy from the middle of Nebraska.
Oh, wow.
And when I think about stewardship, like agriculture in a lot of ways has progressed so far in general about how they are stewards of the land, from no-till to no fertilizer. I remember growing up and on the farm, and we had a company come out and dig a hole, like this huge, like probably a 50, 20, well, I'll say 30-yard hole. And it was gravity irrigation. And so that water would end up in this pit. And it was a reuse pit. And I was thinking, okay, well, this is this huge body of water. What are we going to do with it? The process was just keep recycling it. If you're going to have it, recycle it, because in gravity irrigation, it just goes flooding down. And so it has to collect somewhere, usually in a ditch. Where does it go from there? Can we reuse it? And so my dad decided, hey, we needed to build these reuse pits so we can keep that water flowing, because he knew that that was our greatest resource on that land was water. Fortunately, underneath the land was the Ogallala, is the Ogallala Aquifer, but even that's being stressed and challenged. But so I think about sustaining Arizona. I think about my time growing up on a farm and irrigating, and I never got to plant the corn. I could go do other things, but you know, I think about just being a good steward to making sure that it's around and in good condition for the next 50 or 100 years, because no one is creating more land.
No.
You can't create more land. And when it comes to our natural resources, you really can't create more of that either. You just hope the elements that create it water, that there's enough snowpack that creates more water more available to all of us. And so I think when I, had conversations with others about what could we do with the next collaborative, uh, you know, Arizonans told us what they care about in a study that we do every year for the past 5 years. We do a media landscape study, and we also ask, what keeps you up at night? What are you worried about? What are you concerned about? And the environment, natural resources, water, very much in the top two boxes of the survey that we do. And so that's telling us something that we need to address it. And again, working with nonprofits such as yourself and others to be a good educational resource for journalists, to help understand the basics so they don't have to start over every single time in the story. They already have a good expertise level of the foundation of it. Now they can go deeper into that story and tell something that allows for the opportunity of change, whoever's listening or reading in that story. But again, Sustaining Arizona has the opportunity to provide just practical solutions to people.
And if you look at your education reporting, the reporting on the environment or the stewardship in Arizona could be just as impactful, because really when you think about stewardship, you're really asking the question of, am I using this resource in the most effective way?
Mhm.
Is there a better process out there? And sometimes with farmers or anybody in general, they're just so busy in their daily life, they don't know that these solutions exist. So being able to spotlight those solutions and say, hey, let's implement these. The other thing about Arizona is we have microclimates. Well, that's how I describe our state. We have places where you could ski. We have places that are really
Yeah.
hot. We have great agricultural centers. So they're all different. So the thing about stewardship, you can't use the same solution in Flagstaff as you do in Phoenix, or maybe you can. The other point I want to make about stewardship too is that there is a point where we have to think about, or we have to answer the question of, if we're not using this resource, or there's not a solution out there, how do we create a solution? And we went to Sundance last year, and we saw a great movie by the Lincoln Foundation, and it was clever because what it did is they posed certain problems that were in the communities. Some had to do with water use. Some had to do with just getting food accessible to all communities. But the solutions were extremely cheap. They relied more on an innovation. So urban farming's approach is to engage kids, problem solve,
Mhm.
and get those innovation practices out there. But without partnering with the media, we can't get those stories out. And what we can't do as stewards is we can't go from community and talk to every person like Johnny Appleseed, harvesting or throwing out the seeds. We need to rely on groups like yours to amplify our messaging. And really, by doing that too, I think it shapes policy, it shapes and changes practices. That's my testimonial.
Yeah.
What do you think? This whole process of doing the longest table, where do you think you're going to have an impact not only with the community, but also helping to elevate solutions from nonprofits and organizations?
Well, I think with the longest table, it's about listening and gathering ideas first and foremost. The ideas from people that can be, again, just real actionable, and then it takes a group of people to put it into action and make it reality. I think and hope that's part of that longest table goal, and we walk away with it. I think that for our association and our foundation, what I would love to see come out of that is finding good friends that will help support and align with our goals and our mission. Again, we're in the fundraising business for this. We just don't manufacture, the money and the checks to be able to help
Well,
fund journalists. So
talk to me about
so we'll
that,
do
because
that.
what you're talking about is a huge undertaking. The big picture, you're telling the story of Arizona. I
Mhm.
mean, just let that sink in for a second. You're telling the story of Arizona. So what is required in telling that story? I'm sure it's a lot to undertake.
It is. It's a lot of fundraising. Our hope with any collaboration that we would do and have done is that when we look at funding journalists, it's about giving them the opportunity to have a fair wage, a good wage. I think that this industry, this media industry is very transient. Um, you might, in the television world, you might start your career in Yuma, and then you might go to Tucson. And after another 2 to 3 years, if your goal is to get to Phoenix, then you move to Phoenix. So within 6 years, you potentially are moving from Yuma to Tucson to Phoenix. And this may be the end point. That person may want to just end their career in one of the best television markets, best media markets in the entire country. And so this might be their end goal. Hopefully, with those positions, the wages increase along the way, uh, but that's not always changed in the same way that the country has changed with inflation and things like that. I mean, it's still been a challenge in the media industry when it comes to that. So with our collaborations, we, working with our media brands that get selected. So there's an application process. So the steps are, Joe, we go out and we fundraise the money, we get it, we put an application process out to all media in Arizona saying, hey, this is the plan, these are the guardrails, this is what we want you to apply for. We go through that, we have a selection committee, they select those initial core brand members to go on this adventure with us, and we help fund the wages for that employee that they hire. So if it's at the Republic, for example, we would help fund that journalist at the Republic. If it were at a TV station, we would help fund that journalist at that television station.
Honestly, I think I understand the relationship you have between existing media outlets and the reporters you have. But talk to me about, because I could see your stories being incredibly useful to individuals or nonprofits or small organizations. What's your role or connection with nonprofits as far as storytelling? It's something that's vital to what we do, and we don't necessarily have the ability or content.
Yeah. So with more journalists on the street that are focused on a specific topic, the chances are more nonprofits, more organizations that are focused in that topic are going to get exposure. We've also done, Joe, some symposiums where we've gotten all the journalists together and we've had experts talk about areas that we need to learn from, whether it's ESAs or anything like that on the education side. We went to a PIMA JTED, a Career Technical Institute in Tucson, and we learned from students that had graduated from or walked and celebrated with certificates from CTE and how they've started their career, or it led them to, a certain, field in college. So we go in there and we introduce the journalists to our partners. And so let's say urban farming, a partner of ours, we put a symposium together where we're talking about, the next steps in our sustaining Arizona. Well, here's Joe, who's going to talk about urban farming and the relationship and the building of students and educating students to get to the point where they're executing on a daily level as well. And so it's an opportunity for those nonprofits, such as yourself, to have a seat at that table and be introduced to the journalists. They kind of sidebar and say, hey, let's connect tomorrow. I want to talk to you tomorrow about this because I'm thinking of a story. And so we're kind of, our foundation in a way at that point is more of a connector. We don't dictate the editorial side of that because that's not our job. That's the newsroom side to do that. But we can connect partners. And so if you send us a news release or a story idea, we would send that out to our journalists and say, hey, here's something somebody might be interested in covering. And again, we're just kind of that connector piece at that point. But we do a lot of work with our journalists after, the initial round of funding, the hiring. We have continual education sessions that, again, connect our partners with the reporters to expose them to opportunities for stories.
So I'm going to go ahead and wrap up now, and I definitely want your final thoughts. But for me, in talking with you, we started out at the very beginning, and we talked about, why is it so important to have an organization like yours, especially with YouTube, where there's thousands of stories being told. And initially, my comment was, what's about the motivation? When you watch these thousands of YouTube videos out there, you really don't know what the motivation is on why they're doing it. Not to say it's good or bad, But what I've found is it sometimes leaves gaps in the story and it's not well rounded. Having an organization like yours going out there and being in 16 communities around Arizona, you really have and focused on a topic, you really get a very well-rounded story when it comes to Arizona, which is really important. The other piece of value I find is that there are organizations like educators, like nonprofits that are looking for stewardship. We just don't have the background in storytelling. So it's not that we can't tell a story, but I don't have access to 16 communities. I can't give a solution or background on that information. So by partnering with you, I get a more well-rounded solution where I can talk to communities and I can better understand it myself. So helping break down those silos, helping to connect people, helping to have a more well-rounded story, I think is the true value. And it's something that we can't get on YouTube because it takes an orchestrated effort. It takes training and it takes focus. So that's where I see the true value of what you do. And it's something to organizations like urban farming that are very necessary. So looking at the longest table, we're going to collect all these different stakeholder groups and you're going to share a story. You're going to help inform us on the messaging as well too. So I find that incredibly valuable. I like to finish the segment before I have everybody like and subscribe to give me your closing thoughts.
Well, you nailed every one of them. I mean, it is about it's about providing factual information that's usable, consumable to Arizonans. If we can help be that binder in a community and strengthen a community through the lens of journalism to tell their stories, I think we'll be better at the end of the day. We'll be stronger. We'll be more agile. We'll be nimble. And we'll be able to celebrate the successes of our communities that leads to celebrating the entire state.
Make sure that you think, first of all, I want to thank my guest today, Tregg. Make sure to attend the longest table. You can find the registration link in our bio. Also, make sure to check out Tregg's organization. Donate, contribute. If you're a nonprofit and you want to connect, make sure to reach out to him because like I said before, he's helping to shape the story of Arizona. And if you're in education or if you're in the field of sustainability, agriculture, he's definitely a valuable resource to help amplify your message. Make sure to like, subscribe, and we'll see you next week.
Thank you for joining the Harvesting Wisdom podcast. Click subscribe and like for ongoing insightful conversations. Explore our webpage for show notes and additional resources. Visit our guests' webpage for deeper insights. Your engagement is the foundation of our journey, and until next time, keep pursuing wisdom.